Good morning, folks. Right, this is part 2 of the David Southall. In the last upload, we kind of got the backdrop of him, and I said that I would get into the experiments, which many people have alleged hindered their children. And some of these children did die during these experiments. Parents of these children believe that the experiments were responsible for the death of their children, but that's never been 100% proved. But knowing, knowing how the establishments cover up for itself, then I don't know. Right, so I'm going to read you something that I found, just to give one case, and just how these accusations obliterate your life. So this was, excuse me, the cold to come back with a vengeance this morning. It's definitely getting colder, isn't it? The bathroom was bloody freezing this morning. Right. So this was an article written in 2007. See, nothing's changed. There's still no real closure to this situation. And for those who lost their children, or through death or being taken away from them, this doesn't end just because it's old news. It didn't have a conclusion. Right, Lawrence Alexander suffered a difficult childhood. Neighbours pointed at him in the street. He was inexplicably bullied at school. When he invited a few friends home for tea, they nearly always refused. His family moved from Cornwall to Sussex and then to Shropshire. In every fresh place, there were whispers. His parents lost their jobs, and only members of his extended family who sent birthday presents was his father's sister, Aunt Nina. At 13, Lawrence began to ask why his upbringing seemed so difficult compared to everyone else's. It's only today, nearly 8 years on, that he knows the full truth. His parents had been wrongly accused of one of the worst crimes imaginable, deliberately harming him as a baby. As a result of the allegations made by children's doctor, Dr. David Southall, the family became social pariahs. That does happen. We were very fortunate with our neighbours and stuff when we had the false accusation with regards to Charlotte's death. We had nothing but support. Everyone knew our kids, they were always playing out. We were really close with our neighbours. We were just incredibly lucky because it could have gone the other way. A bundle of papers in Lawrence's NHS records followed him to every new GP and school, repeating the claim that his parents had harmed him. The accusation had scarred his life and theirs. Lawrence has never before told his deeply shocking story. The 21-year-old is central to a government inquiry into Dr. Southall, which could establish once and for all his links to one of the worst scandals in the British medicine for years. The doctor had been praised as a pioneer by colleagues while vilified as arrogant and dangerous by parents and patients. It wasn't just parents and patients that were calling him this. There were a number of medical professionals that found him absolutely unbearable to work with. He has also been in trouble over remarks he made concerning the case of Sally Clark, the mother who was given 2 life sentences for the murder of her 2 children before being released after medical evidence emerged to prove she was innocent. Dr. Southall, who had never met Sally Clark, accused her husband of the murders, a totally unfounded allegation which led to the paediatrician being declared guilty of professional misconduct and barred from child protection work for 3 years. Well, he took it overseas, didn't he, with his charity. The present inquiry, overseen by Attorney General Baroness Scotland, what a waste of time this was, wants to find the answer to a crucial question where Lawrence's parents and many others falsely smeared as child abusers so that Dr. Southall could put their children into care and use them as guinea pigs in deeply contentious medical experiments, which many would argue were also deeply immoral. Excuse me. God, I thought that cold was going. It's definitely come back. Excuse me. Look at the state of my eyes as well. Proper full of cold again. The experiments authorised by Hospital's Ethics Committee were carried out despite doubts of worried parents. Incredibly, it's now alleged that some of the tiny babies were forced to breathe poisonous gases and deprived of oxygen. The results of these tests were stored by the paediatrician in 4,500 secret files. But the true nature of the experiments to discover the cause of cot death is only coming to light now the children involved are grown up. The Attorney General's officials have asked to see the Southall files. They want to know what they contain and if they were produced at court hearings at what parents were falsely accused of child abuse. It's not particularly well, okay. The suspicion is that justice may have been perverted by the paediatrician because vital evidence in the files, which established the children he diagnosed as victims of parental abuse, had never been harmed but were in fact genuinely sick children. And this was deliberately hidden from the criminal court judges. We never did see these files. I can't find anything on that, and sort of like going back to being around this, I don't recall these files coming to light. The GMC is also due to resume a hearing in a week's time into Southall's fitness to practice following a series of complaints by parents of children treated by him. Dr Southall, who denies any wrongdoing, has worked at the Royal Brompton in London, University Hospital of North Staffordshire in Stoke and hospitals in Wales, the home counties Doncaster, Rotherham and Barnsley. One Welsh mother who said her son was brain damaged by Southall's research told a hearing earlier this year, "He treated my son like a laboratory rat." As for Lawrence Alexandra's parents, one of the cases being examined at the GMC hearing, they always objected to their son being involved in the Dr Southall sleep studies. But when they refused to cooperate, Janet and Robin Alexander were accused by Southall of pretending that their son was ill. So this was like the Munchausen by proxy, which Roy Meadows invented for his own, fame and notoriety. But when they refused to cooperate, Janet and Robin Alexander were accused by Southall of pretending that their son was ill. Although they say there was not a shred of evidence the little boy was made a ward of court. It meant that tests could be done without his parents' agreement, and Lawrence himself now narrowly escaped being put into the care system or adopted. This week, Lawrence said, "I believe that my loving mother and father were labelled as child abusers by Dr Southall because they tried to stop his experiments on me. The appalling slur blackened their names, yet the idea of my caring parents being child abusers is laughable. They were not parents that ever smacked." Today, Lawrence lives in Ludlow, Shropshire, with his mum and dad. Tragically, he is 80% physically disabled. At the age of 14, he was struck by a muscle weakness which led to his body sustaining severe cell damage only ever seen before in cancer patients completing chemotherapy. He said, "I want to know how my health had been ruined. Is it because of the tests I underwent as a small child? We know that the so-called sleep studies carried out by Dr Southall involved giving babies noxious gases, including carbon monoxide. Babies were deprived of oxygen. I want to know what implication this has had on my health." Dr Southall has always refused to comment on his work or research to the Daily Mail. He has repeatedly been at the centre of controversies. His involvement with Sally Clark, who died earlier this year, is all the more bizarre because he had nothing to do with the inquiry into the children's death. No, he didn't. He just chipped in off something he saw on the telly. We spoke about this in the last one. Oh, it gets to it. After watching television documentary on the couple, he simply phoned the police with his theory that her husband, Stephen, was the killer. Can you imagine being that arrogant that you think that you can watch something on telly and be Inspector Clouseau and solve a case? Right, I'm not a big fan of who's coming up next. Meanwhile, concern has grown about his experiments on children. Bill Bache, the solicitor for Angela Cannings, he was also our solicitor, wasn't his biggest fan. Don't think he was my biggest fan either, but I suppose he done his job, didn't he? Didn't get the truth out. It didn't, but there was a no case to answer, so I suppose he done his job. Bill Bache, the solicitor for Angela Cannings, another mother accused of infanticide, jailed and then freed on appeal, has written to the Attorney General and the Department of Health, estimating that 10,000 people have been affected by the actions of David Southall. 10,000 people. That's an astronomical amount of people, isn't it? This all fizzled into nothingness. He fears that behind this number lurks a potential scandal of gigantic proportions. Yeah, no shit it was, and still is. Mr. Bates is so concerned that he says the government should look into Dr. Southall's work over a 25-year period. Yeah, for sure. Also need to be looking into what he's been up to with his charity in these poorer countries. In a letter to the Department of Health, he says Dr. Southall may have caused death or very serious bodily harm, including irreparable brain damage to the children. Mr. Bache believes parents were told by the doctor that he would report them to the police and social services if they did not cooperate with the experiments. That's 100% true, because I've spoken to people whose children were in these experiments, and that's exactly what happened. They were made, the foundations of Munchausen by proxy was being laid, that they either were going to be part of this experiment, or like in the Alexander case, you're just making it up. You're making out that your child's ill. A lot of these children were ill, genuinely ill. It wasn't Munchausen's or anything like that. And Munchausen's is such a difficult diagnosis, and around this time, the 90s, like mid-80s through to mid-2000s, you know, it was going around like the common cold, the volume of people who were being accused of this. And this is a tiny percentage that went to criminal court, because most of them didn't meet the threshold for the CPS to pick up the case, but they certainly met the threshold of make it up as you go along in the family court. Mr. Bache is so concerned that he says government should look into Dr. Southall's work over a 25-year period. In a letter to the Department of Health, he says Dr. Southall may have caused the death, blah, blah, blah. There is evidence that he carried out these threats, and as a result there have been convictions of parents for murder and grievous bodily harm while children have been placed in care or adopted. That's absolutely correct, but what Mr. Bache doesn't understand here, because he's not a family court solicitor, is that for every one person being falsely accused in the criminal court of this, or rightly confused, you have the premise of innocent before guilty, so... for every one of these that was getting into criminal court, there was a couple of hundred that were being smashed in the family court. His concerns are another complete waste of space that I've bumped heads with so many times. His concerns are supported by Lib Dem MP John Hemming, who told the Commons many of the parents of Southall babies who were choked, given carbon monoxide and had their breathing damaged in other ways did not give consent to the experiments. The Alexanders were no exception. Lawrence first became ill 7 weeks after being born. He would often stop breathing or turn blue, signs of sudden infant death syndrome or cot death. At first, doctors thought he was epileptic and he underwent numerous brain scans. At 5 months, he was referred to Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children in London. His mother says, "We were told Mr. Southall, who was a cot death expert, who worked not far away at the Brompton Hospital in Chelsea, could help Lawrence." Oh. However, we were suspicious when we met him there in January of 1987. He looked like a research student. Now we know that he was not qualified as a child doctor at the time, but was a senior lecturer in paediatrics. Lawrence was transferred for 1 month to Brompton Hospital, where his parents always slept beside him overnight. Dr. Southall insisted on exhaustive tests. Janet says, "We became quickly suspicious that Dr. Southall was using our son as a guinea pig, and we told him that we were going to take our child home. It was then that the paediatrician invited Janet and Robin to a meeting to discuss Lawrence's progress. Instead, to their horror, they realised that they had stepped into an ambush. We found social workers from Kensington and Chelsea Council and their solicitors sent in by Dr. Southall. One social worker told me, 'You need to help us, parents. There's nothing wrong with your child.' It suddenly clicked that we were in an incredibly dangerous situation. They were saying we made up Lawrence's illness. There was no logic. They asked me to sign papers giving the legal right to care for Lawrence. I had no choice but to do what they said. I was afraid I would lose him forever." Plenty, yeah, and it wouldn't have made any difference. There's plenty of people on the internet like, "Do not agree to this and don't sign anything." It doesn't work. It doesn't work. What they will do, if you don't do it their way, they will get the police involved and you will have an emergency protection order on you like that, and the result is the same. So I don't blame them for that. There's plenty of people that make out, well, you know, if you hadn't signed this thing or that thing. It doesn't work like that. They get their own way. It's a rigged game. Janet told the hospital, and of course Dr. Southall was now in charge of Lawrence's care. Crucially, they would no longer be allowed to see him at night. It meant that he was left unattended by his parents from evening to the following morning, and Janet was forced to stop breastfeeding. How disgusting is that? Although they did not know it at the time, Dr. Southall had accused them of suffering from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a disorder where parents are said to fabricate an illness about their children to draw attention to themselves. The theory was devised by another paediatrician, Professor Roy Meadows. He was found guilty of professional misconduct 2 years ago for giving misleading and incorrect testimony as an expert witness in the case of Sally Clark, who was wrongly accused of suffering from Munchausen by proxy. He has since retired. But what of Lawrence Alexander? During the past year, he's been searching for his own childhood medical records, which prove he was enrolled in Southall's sleep studies at Brompton Hospital. So what exactly happened during those nights 20 years ago when his parents were barred from seeing him? Was Dr. Southall carrying out experiments on him which amounted to child abuse, the precise crime the paediatrician accused his parents of having committed on their son? Significantly, Lawrence's records of the time show clearly that he had a life-threatening illness. He was suffering from various ailments, most significantly gastroesophageal reflux, a condition that causes breathing problems and which is linked inextricably to cot death. Yeah, it is. It is. There's varying degrees of reflux, and for most children, they sort of battle through it, you know. But for others, it's really quite, well, it's completely serious. Yet nothing was done to cure him. Dr. Southall told social workers his parents have pursued the belief that he's seriously ill. They must now accept that their child is healthy. The Alexanders fought back against Southall. They sought legal advice and took the case to the High Court. In late February 1987, a judge in London told them they could return home to Cornwall with Lawrence, but that he should remain the subject of an interim care order. It was only 8 months later that he regained the right to look after their son without the interference of authorities. They never again saw Southall, who was working as a paediatrician by that time at Staffordshire, although he's barred from child protection work. Yet the stigma of being child abusers remained, even after they changed their surname by deed poll to try and escape the past. This is awful, isn't it? And this is where parents, some parents did take their own lives over this. Some parents did lose their children, either through death or being taken into care.